this computer. There we go. All righty, thank you. I always forget that. So, annual meeting. Here's the first slide to show you we are here, and we are open, and that's a big thing to celebrate. Not everything is open in this town. We've been through, all of us, you know, an interesting number of months, and we have some interesting months ahead of us, but we're doing okay. Thanks to the hard work of Chessie, especially as our museum administrator, and our other staff members as well. We reopened safely when New York State allowed us to as a museum, and it's been, you know, really successful. We feel safe here. People are coming and learning about our history, and you know, it's newly relevant in so many ways, and we've had really good visitor numbers. So we hope to be able to stay open, you know, as things go forward this winter. We're keeping our eyes on that, but so far so good. The museum reopened. We are doing tours and talks. We've been really busy with different public programs. We are doing our regular sanatorium tour again, and providing some different online programs that many of you have been a part of. We've had special presentations that we've done, and our porch concerts. We did our Live from the Porch series. Kate, our Pure Porch on Wheels coordinator, did that during the early days of the quarantine time, and that was just a really fun project that we did. Kate continues to conduct oral histories. She's up to how many, Kate? You want to yell it out? Do you know the number?
This year I've done over 50, I
wow.
think now.
Super awesome. So, you know, what a great thing that we are capturing the stories and the memories of people in our community. That, you know, Kate has continued to conduct many interviews by phone and video during this time. You know, a really great way for keeping people connected and involved with HSL. Kate has also done an In the Time of COVID project where she's been capturing people's input about what's happening today, because we recognize that this is a historic time that will be historic as time goes on. And so we're, you know, really getting snapshots of how this is affecting people today in town. And that's just really, really valuable. We've been continuing to do educational programs for school groups, presentations by Zoom to university groups and school classes. And we've produced a lot. We've been writing a lot. We recognized kind of early on that not everybody's on Zoom. Not everybody wants to stare at their computer screen all day, and people want to stay connected through the written word. And so we've been writing and reading a lot. I think all of the staff has taken time to really educate ourselves a little bit more about local history, about through the protests that went on this summer. We all took the time to read about Sally Svensson's book, Blacks in the Adirondacks. We read Rural Indigenousness by Melissa Otis. So I think we've taken some time to be more thoughtful, both you know, learning and in writing and connecting with others. So that's been really meaningful for us. The other thing that we've been very busy with is the Trudeau building. So one building is not enough for us. We wanted Dr. Trudeau's other building too. So not only do we now own the laboratory, but we own the Trudeau building. Built in 1894, here's what it looked like around the turn of the century. Here's what it looks like today. Not quite as beautiful. Needing a little bit of love, and we are raising the money. We now own it. We have done the design work. We've done a lot of the preparation to get ready for the construction so that it will look like this. And construction starts next year. We're going out to bid at the end of this year, and we will start construction, doing the complete exterior and some of the interior work as well, starting next year. So super exciting. It gives us the space to really tell a broader history of the Saranac Lake region, and much more of the history of Trudeau, TB, and curing in Saranac Lake. So it's an exciting project, and I just want to give you a little bit of an update about where we are. We've completed the interpretive plan with a museum consultant. We have a document that reflects the input of community members, other area institutions like the Saranac Lake Free Library, the Adirondack Experience Museum, Six Nations Museum. So the interpretive plan really is a blueprint for the stories we want to tell in the new exhibit spaces. We have contracted with another consultant to create the layout and the plans for the initial plans for the exhibit. We have some renderings that help us visualize the spaces. And we've been working on a visioning project for some interpretation in the building about Native American history, which is something that we have really never presented or discussed in any sort of thoughtful way here at Historic Saranac Lake. And it really is a part, for sure, of the history of the region. So I'm starting to think about that with partners in the Native American community. So that's really exciting. And, you know, we're a ways out from doing that, but we're just starting to think about that now. Just want to show you some of the plans for the building real quick. This is the downstairs floor plan. There's a lot to see on your screen here, too much to see in 1 second, but this is available on our website and it shows you what our current thinking is about the museum exhibits. I encourage everybody to take a look at that and let us know your thoughts and ideas. What are you excited about? What do you think we're forgetting? What stories do you know? What artifacts might you have in your attic that you want to share for the exhibit that you think could work? So we want to hear from you. So the downstairs, to go backwards 1 sec, whoops, hold on. Downstairs is really the history of the region, talking about some of the Saranac Lake School District area, which includes Vermontville, Gabriel's, Rainbow Lake, bringing those stories in and talking about the history before and up to tuberculosis, a changing exhibits gallery. And then on the second floor, really getting into the TB history where Dr. Trudeau himself cured in his own cure porch. And there's a whole lot of room up there to really get into the history in the area of the sanatoria, the patient experience, some of the amazing people that were here for the cure, arts and crafts, occupational therapy, and a room that talks about Winter Carnival and community life and some of the traditions that happened through the TB years and continue today. It's you know, important to us that we connect the two buildings. So we're going to have two museum buildings. We want it to be one campus experience. So we're working with our architect, Harry Gordon, who's here today. Thank you for joining us, Harry, to design a really complete site plan that really unites the two buildings and makes for an integrated experience for museum visitors. So that's an important part of things. Real quick, here's where we are with money and phases. We've raised the money to pay for the building and do all the planning, and it is expensive. All the asbestos, a lot of this asbestos remediation, all of that work is done and complete. The phase 1 of construction is that much money. There's a lot of work to do to the building. We have to take off all the vinyl siding and there's nothing underneath. It's a naked building. So we're gonna have to put up all new wood siding. It's gonna be beautiful. Structural work to be done. That following year, our plan is to do the second phase of construction. So all the interior work, mechanicals, lifts, site work, and the museum exhibits in the following year. So within 3 years, we expect to be open as a beautiful museum there and here, refreshed exhibits here, total cost of $3.6 million. Wow, that's way more than we expected when we got ourselves into this. But we have been amazed with the interest and excitement in the community. We have raised to date $1.85 million for this, and that includes a lot of state funding as well. So we're off to a fantastic start, and we encourage you to get involved and to help us. So one final phase that is sort of out there as the last thing is to build a handicap lift here at the laboratory and connect that to the building. So that's another phase that we are planning on. What's next? Construction next year. Fundraising and naming opportunities continue now. Ambassadorship, and that's where all you guys come in, all of our members, our board members, talking to people in the community, letting them know that this is the community museum and it is going to happen. I think it's going to be one of the bright spots in 2021. So spreading the good news about that is important. We are going to start a museum branding project. We can no longer call ourselves the Saranac Laboratory Museum. We're more than just a laboratory now. So we're going to contract with a local design team to come up with a logo and a brand that works for both buildings. We're starting that project this fall and continuing to plan our exhibits. And that's it. So that was pretty fast, I hope. Yes, I think it was pretty fast. I'm now going to hand it over to our speaker tonight, and let me stop sharing my screen. and encourage everybody to stay on mute. And I'm going to introduce our speaker, who's the one person who's not on mute up here on our screen, Christopher Shaw. Chris, we're so glad that you joined us here tonight. Thank you for coming. Thank you for writing this amazing book. I emailed Chris, was it yesterday? And I said, I feel like I've taken like hallucinogenic drugs, which not that I've ever done that, but now I kind of understand what it's like because I read the whole, like half of the book. I couldn't sleep. And so I woke up and drank a ton of coffee and I just read it and it was intense. So I'm really excited to hear more about it and to hear your stories about how this came to be. Let me just introduce Chris real quick, tell you a little bit about him. In the 1970s and 80s, he worked as a ski lift operator, the caretaker of a fishing club, a whitewater guide, an innkeeper, and as the editor of Adirondack Life. His stories and articles have appeared in many publications, including the New York Times. And he has received several different awards for his writing. His program on NCPR in the 1990s profiled writers of the Adirondacks in northern New York. And his book, Sacred Monkey River, A Canoe Trip with the Gods, about paddling in the Usumacinta River watershed of Chiapas and Guatemala, appeared in 2000. And the Washington Post called it a magnificent achievement. Shaw recently retired from Middlebury College, where he taught writing and co-administered the Middlebury Fellowships in Environmental Journalism. He and his wife, Sue Kavanaugh, salve the wounds of exile by spending as many weeks a year as they can in their one-room cabin on a remote northern lake, which I just found out is Lake Osita. So we know that remote northern lake.
So, or as it was originally known, Miller Pond, or originally since the 1820s.
So I'll let you take it away.
Well, Amy, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for coming here. I love historic Saranac Lake. I love everything you do. And boy, all your plans look so exciting. I think it's a great organization. And I'm so honored to be invited to speak to you for the annual meeting, especially since Amy invited me before she even read the book. and as if you've read it, or if you do read it, you will see that it has very little respect for historical veracity, right? It's a little bit, I take great liberties with dates and certain people who shouldn't be alive or present at the same time and things like that. But, well, that's what you do when you're writing fiction a little bit. I also stretched the geography out a little bit. So there are, lake systems that don't exist kind of squashed in with the other ones. And that's kind of what you have to do a little bit if you're going to be very specific about the nature of a landscape in order to get your fictional characters generating their own kind of action and action that's plausible within that world. The two things have to match up, which is just a little bit off to the side of reality, right? It's like it really is, but not exactly like it really is. So you can allow for certain kinds of dramatic possibilities. So you heard a little bit of my snippet bio there, which reveals my very checkered past. Most of my checkered past was passed in the Adirondacks, where I lived year-round for 30 years. But I go all the way back to 4 or 5 years old and an old great camp in Thurman, New York, near Stony Creek, where I went every summer until I was 10, and then east side of Lake George, all the rest of growing up. And during which time we were always up in the high peaks. And by the time I was 19, I was living here year round in the Southern Adirondacks and doing all those checkered things that you heard about, some successfully and some terribly. So I had a lot to draw from. And one of the questions that Amy asked in in a, and I'm not going to speak very long because I'm more interested in hearing from you guys. One of the questions that Amy asked in a email to me was the layers of storytelling and how the fiction and the reality fact kind of flowed together. And that's an interesting question. One of the things she said was, I must have worked on it for so many years. And the fact is I didn't work on it. And I think I mentioned to her when I heard one of the, I mean, I worked on it for a year or 18 months or something. But I didn't really research it in the way I might have researched Sacred Monkey River or another kind of book. And you could say maybe I should have in a few places. I did go back and check some facts and change some things after the fact, but I wanted it to live in a more experiential way for readers, rather than just be sort of attached to touch points that, little checks of each bit of fact. So, the facts are woven in together with, or let's say the reality of objective current reality is woven in together with the fictional reality, and in a lot of places. And then I hope that the conceit of the novel, that it's these, which is a sort of an old-fashioned hackneyed device, found journals and tapes and things like that, that they're like, you can go to the Adirondack Museum and find Rosalind's papers and things like that, right? So I'm trying to weave the whole conceit into the very fabric of the publication. So Miller Pond Editions, right? So that's my conceit. But the bit about the Donnelly's Corner shootout, some of the other stuff about bootlegging, some of the careers of the characters, the betting over marksmanship at the dance, many other things come straight out of stories I heard living here, or that I witnessed, things that I saw. So that's a long list. And it might be better if you wanted to ask me some of those. And it's mostly just information I absorbed over the years, working with people locally and reading a lot. I mean, up until 20 years ago or so, I'd read just about everything. But I didn't really set out with a research agenda. I set out with more of a feeling of wanting to evoke what it felt like in that period of transition, as modernity and the frontier were crashing into each other. So that's one of the backgrounds of the piece. And I did have in mind some other things when I was writing it. So, Bill Kennedy and what he did with William Kennedy, what he did with Albany. And now I'm blanking on a name and I'm terribly embarrassed, but I'll think of it. I did have other sort of books and writers from before who I was trying to coast on the previous examples of. So there's some of that going on in there. Am I rambling, or is this a pretty good place to begin? Has anybody gotten around to reading it besides Amy? 1, 2, Fran, okay. Very good. Oh, Kirk Sullivan, yes. Actually, Kirk read it many years ago when I first read it. I actually wrote this in the early 2000s to entertain myself. And there was a previous installment, a novella, with the character Abel and the very minor character in here, Sonia. And I put it away for a number of reasons. And when I retired from teaching a couple of years ago, I was looking around, and I'd finished another memoir, which is under consideration at a commercial publisher right now. And I realized I had, the equivalent of 3 complete Adirondacks books. And if nobody else was going to do them, I was just going to do them myself. So I dredged this one up out of the files, and I put it together, and I looked at it expecting to hate it, and I didn't hate it. And, over 15 or 16 years, it's, you couldn't see the wires so easily anymore. In other words, I wasn't so allergic to knowing all the trickery in it. When I read it, some of that stuff had kind of faded into the background. So now it's out. I would say a slightly new and improved version. I hope Kirk thinks so. But are there any questions to this point or comments?
So we do have one question here from Rich, and he asks, was Lake Aurora based on any known location?
No, Lake Aurora is a complete fabrication. I mean, it's a composite of 5 or 6 different Adirondack villages and bars and stuff like that. I've always been very proud of the name, the Trap Dyke Tap Room. I saved it up for years before I finally got to use it. A lot of the stuff that I put in here is crap that I'd been saving for literally 30 years and never found a vehicle to stick it in. And so I just threw it all in. Lake Aurora is the kind of a name I would think that you might name something, and I'd like Northern Lights. And, it's a composite. Like most of the characters are composite or invented.
Mm-hmm.
I told Bill Kennedy once, I said, who wrote a novel called Legs. I said, Bill, I used legs in a novel. I hope you don't mind. And he said, no, I don't care. I said, but the character of Legs Diamond in the novel is more like the actor who played Dutch Schultz in the movie The Cotton Club, which he also wrote. Mm-hmm. So, ha, 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 ha. So, yeah.
Can I ask a second question?
You should ask as many as you like.
It's actually about the creative process. I read a book or a biography by C.S. Forrester, and he talked about his creative process in that book. And he wrote the Hornblower series and the Amazon,
Sure.
Amazon Queen or whatever it was, and a lot of other books and TV scripts and so on.
Yeah.
And he described it as he would have the entire book finished in his mind before he started putting it on paper.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if
people do that. John Irving, the novelist, is the same way. He outlines everything. He has it all in his mind before he even starts writing. But I've felt my way through this one. So, but it's interesting that you asked that, because it does show how the act of the creative process solves some of its own problems. In other words, after you get characters in action doing things in a plausible world that you try to evoke as clearly as you can. Borges said that you can invent any kind of a fictional world you want as long as it's consistent in all its particulars within itself. So after that happens, you get things going in motion and action. So I was like, you talk about Hornblower, I kind of had like Patrick O'Brien in the back of my mind. I don't know if you know his, Aubrey and Maturin novels. So, after I got those guys talking, it was mostly about playing around with old timer talk. And, it was easy to kind of get into Lonnie and, to pretend to sound like him. And when I started to do that, situations started to present themselves. And I was working off this question. In fact, I was that guy in the 70s, Abel St. Martin. I see you have an oral history program. Great. I think that's the greatest thing in the world. You should absolutely make it a major thrust, because when I was talking to these people back in the early mid 70s, and I knew I was hearing echoes from, ancient times, I thought I have to get a tape deck, reel to reel tape deck this big, and a microphone. How am I going to do that? And I didn't have the money, and I, never got around to a lot of things in those days, and I never did. And they, in fact, all died before I got around to it. But there are echoes of their stories all through this book.
And Chris, thank you. I think you sort of answered Andy Rodden's question. He asked if you interviewed real people to get information from them. And I think you sort of answered that in talking about your prior conversations with some of these old timers.
I'm wondering if I actually sat down and interviewed anybody for this book. I think not.
Okay.
I don't remember doing that, but I did ask questions of people I heard, and this is like not talking out of school, but let's face it, old Jimmy LaFountain and Harry Tucker were both like basically bootleggers, right? I mean, their relatives were bootleggers. They were smugglers and lowlifes. You would hang around in the bars and hear them talking about all sorts of bullshit. Excuse me, and that was some of the stuff I was trying to remind me of the question again, please.
If you interviewed people for the book.
So no, not specifically.
One of the things that comes through, you're talking about the voices of the people that you spoke to over the years. And the other thing that comes through very clearly is the music of that time. And I was curious are you like really into fiddle music? Like, do you know a lot about this music, or have you been intentionally listening to this old time fiddle music over the years, or how did you get that in there?
Well, the last chapter, takes place at the Stony Creek Inn in the early 70s, and it's based on an actual first fiddler's jamboree that this great character Art Pratt used to put on, and starting in the very early 70s, 72 or so. And he was a great fan of a French Canadian fiddler named Simon St. Pierre. So in the book, Art Pratt goes dashing off, like 2 or 3 nights before to find the great, mythical fiddle player, but it wasn't Fran Germain. It was really Simon St. Pierre, and everything else in there after that is pretty much straight as I remembered it. Mm-hmm. And actually, my old friend Hank Soto, who was one of the co-founders of the Stony Creek Band, called me the other day, and he said, it's like he was there and he remembered it too. And so that kept going on for a long time. Really, another 5 or 6 years, those affairs would go on once or twice a year. And it was a big part of our lives in the 70s. All those tunes exactly the way I had them in there. And then I've known a couple other fiddlers and talked to them over the years, including one student I had who was from the Upper Valley, the Upper Connecticut Valley in New Hampshire. And, local farming family. And he was an amazing traditional fiddler. He had taken a year off before he came to Middlebury and hitchhiked around Ireland playing in bars. And boy, he was great. So I got some of the stuff from him too. He was the one who did those meterless, keyless Cape Breton dirges, They were just so beautiful. And then Stony Creek in general was a very musical place in the 70s and has remained so really over the years. And, in this memoir I write about playing out when I was younger and the early days of Cafe Lena and stuff like that. So.
Can I jump in here and say something?
Please.
The quality of your writing, Chris, and the rich descriptions of these scenes and these characters, and I haven't finished the book yet, but there are just memorable scenes. The one in particular about the card shooting at the dance.
Thank you
And you
so much.
mentioned, and
It meant so
I'd
much
like,
to do that well.
I'd like to know if you were there, I mean, not there, if you witnessed somebody shoot a
Yes.
card this way. You're
Yes.
kidding.
No, that was Donnie with Jeff, Donnie Burnham. You know Jeff Burnham from
Yeah.
Lake Placid?
Yes.
His brother. They own the Minerva Hotel. And his brother, Donnie, was, tending bar. We were up there fishing from Stony Creek in 1970 or something like that, 69. It was April or May, and it was snowing, and we quit fishing. We went to the bar, and there was a bunch of old timers in there, and like bets start going down, and we went out back, and by the Jesus, if he didn't split the card in half on 3 shots with a 22, 50 feet, faced out. And with people getting mad, not that mad.
So just listening to you tell this story now is such a treat, because you're such a storyteller throughout this whole book. And I feel like you are one of these people who lived in the 70s and know this area so incredibly well and describe it so well. And
I used to.
And I'm just so glad you're writing this kind of thing.
Thanks, Fran. That means a lot. I really appreciate it.
I have to agree, Fran, and I was just trying to scroll through my copy. I had to buy the thing on your book online, so I have this PDF on my computer, which is not the way to read a book, but that's what I did this time. And I made notes in the margins, and somewhere in there I wrote "nice picnic." And I don't know, I can't find it right now, but there's this beautiful description of the picnic.
I like the picnic.
And when you're writing about, when you're describing nature and you're describing people interacting with nature or appreciating it, there's just this beautiful writing that takes over. So I want to go back and find the picnic passage, but it's there's sort of this.
Is it when they go paddling in the fall and they shoot the ducks?
Yeah, and it's very there's sort of the sense of loss, because there's something that it's.
Shall I read the first chapter or the first paragraph of it?
That'd be great.
This is the chapter called Double or Nothing, at the end of which is this marksmanship contest we were talking about. In late October, on an Indian summer Sunday with the sun the color of a tangerine, the 2 couples filled a pack basket and a wanagon with bread, sliced cold pork, a jar of horseradish, fresh tomatoes that Emil had brought from Caughnawaga, shortbread cookies, wool blankets, a pot to boil water in, and basic utensils. Carrying a side-by-side 12-gauge LC Smith and a fly rod, they left from Jack Diamond's dock and Germain's 14-foot guideboat, a Willard Hanmer painted black outside and pale blue inside, and a 15-foot green canvas canoe, a white from Maine with brass fittings and a carved wooden yoke. Leaving Clear Pond through the channel into Rainbow Lake, they then carried across the esker at the head of that lake a short way through the pines to Jones Pond. After following the Jones Pond outlet through a narrow spruce-lined passage, they emerged into Osgood Pond and spread their blankets on the small beach to the right of the inlet. The reds had fallen from the early maples, the yellows just fading from the birches, and the golds were in full crescendo on the tamaracks along shore, whose needles carpeted the small beach where they landed. For 2 hours, they ate, talked, and drank coffee. After a brief nap, the women stood in the glacial shallows amid the stalks of the hollow reeds with their skirts pulled up to their thighs, wriggling their toes in the hard rippled sand. Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a little more of that. I tried, anyway, they get home with, they catch some trout and some ducks, and they go home and have quite a feast. There's a lot of feasting and a lot of food in the book. I invented a lot of old-fashioned sounding food. I put in jugged hare in the TB Society Christmas party, even though I don't even know what that is.
I just figured you knew something I didn't, so it all sounded good to me.
It's a real thing, but...
I think Amy and I need to share that with the VHA now. which is the successor of the TV Society.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I have no idea if anything like that ever went on either, but you know, some of the stuff I got about, you know, the cure cottages and the doctors and stuff, that did come out of my reading years ago a couple of times of Phil Gallo's wonderful Cure Cottages book. I mean, he's got such great details and anecdotes in there. I mean, that really evokes the time in a very tangible way. And I didn't go back and look at anything when I was writing it, but I was definitely echoing a lot of that stuff. Like I got the Broadway agent in a house with like arts and crafts with a touch of shingle. I wouldn't have known what that was unless I'd read Phil. So he's a good writer.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? I'm going to jump in with another one if that's okay.
Go right ahead.
So I'm going to put you on the spot with your scathing indictments of.
Oh yeah, my scathing indictments. You know, I was looking at them. I was going. So why don't you continue what I said?
Oh, should I quote one?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm curious what your vision is for, like, do we have a chance to redeem ourselves here? So.
Oh, you know, yeah, yes. I mean, if that's the question, you know, I have a thing in here about, so, you know, it's Abel St. Martin writing in the 80s, and he's talking about the slumlords and the, you know, all the cure cottages are gone to shit, and, you know, everything's boarded up or plywood and indoor, outdoor carpeting, you know. And I think I was, so it presents a kind of a counter narrative to any sort of boosterish kind of feelings you might have about such a great place that I love. But I don't think it's so far from the truth going back and looking at, you know, the 70s. And one of the things that fiction does is that it presents a counter narrative. That's what it's supposed to do. Otherwise, what's the point, you know? So, but to answer your question, yes, you know, it's already redeemed itself. I mean, look at historic Saranac Lake. Saranac Lake has just seemed impossibly groovy to me for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years compared to the old days, compared to any place in the Adirondacks in the old days. I mean, much more diverse, great businesses, more people, great stuff going on. I mean, you know, Pendragon's been there forever, a few other things, but it's just like the vibe in the village itself has seemed much more alive recently until this crazy, you know, blankety blank going on now. So absolutely. I mean, all we got to do is just get through this mess, right? Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, but I also think that there's, you know, you hit the nail on the head with some of that too. I mean, we can sort of see the glass half full, which is important, or we're, you know, why should we look for the empty glass? That's not very smart. But you know, there is so much that has been lost from our history, and even before
the nature of permanence too, you know.
Right? I mean, it's and we can sort of, I think sometimes we live in this bubble where we pretend that we can go backwards, and you know, we can't.
No, there's no back.
Yeah.
No, this is okay. I mean, really, for don't you go any place in North America, you find a area this size with this kind of protection and wilderness and people living, and I mean, really, the population needs to kind of still keep coming on, right? Not in terms of numbers so much, but in terms of resilience and like cosmopolitanism. I don't know, you know, but that's always been there, you know, at one level, and that's what gives it its grainy flavor. You know, it's not just the Germains and the Monroes, you know, when those guys had been to the city, you know, they'd been to Europe, and they'd they knew their way around. They were not completely backward people at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like those guys I used to know. I mean, you know, one of them had been to Mexico with Pershing. Then he had been in World War I in Europe and in World War II as a wrangler and a cook. And man, he was hardcore dude. George Arndt. He didn't, there's no other elements really. He was a Dutch Mohawk from Schenectady. But, you know, some of those guys, you wouldn't have really held them up as great paragons of character either, frankly.
Hmm.
Anyway, I mean, you added to your comment there that isn't that the way it is everywhere, in terms of where I trashed, intellectual life in the Adirondacks. And it's mostly about, I forget what I said, wealth and I forget. But yeah, it is like that everywhere. And that's why, when you're looking through a prism of experience, which I did for 25 years, everything I saw was through the prism of my experience of the Adirondacks.
Mm-hmm.
Then you see that, yes, the world is very much the same.
Hmm. And so when you were getting to know the Adirondacks, you were a transplant yourself from the Hudson Valley. Did
Yeah,
you?
Mohawk Valley. I mean, I think of Plattsburgh and I'm sorry, continue your question.
Well, I was just curious if you felt like a transplant, or did you feel like it took a while to become a part of the Adirondacks?
That's both a good and a really irritating question.
Well, it's coming from somebody who's been there and still
Yeah,
is.
sure. So
I'm
you're getting
here
it,
20 years ago.
I'm
Yeah.
hearing that
I don't
experience.
feel like your experience of really connecting with the Adirondack culture in the way that you have. I haven't done that myself,
Yeah.
and so I respect it, and I also I just find it really intriguing. Like to me, it kind of takes guts to connect with the culture to that on that level, to that. I mean, to hang out in the bars and talk to the old guys, and really devote a lot of time to that. That's I think that's
That's how you look at it.
so did you feel like
Yeah, so let me so good. I wasn't a stranger. This is where everything mattered to me. Grew up in the suburbs and went to a suburban school, and I hated every minute of it. I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I dropped out of college and I went straight to, we were hippies living on the river in Hadley on the Sacandaga.
Mm.
And then the second year we didn't leave in the winter, and rented, and it just started to turn into a thing like that. So the important part of that question is basically, did I have a feeling of belonging? And did I feel like an outsider? Well, it's still true, but in those days, you were an outsider if you didn't graduate from high school there, and even then. So there was always a lot of that, and we used to get a lot of shit. But by the time people had been, this whole sort of musical gang and moved up to Stony Creek, and there were a few other people around back to the Landers and such. 3 or 4 years into that, there stopped being such a distinction, and there was a general acceptance, and the new people sort of started to marry the local people, and it all turned in the way it's always been. The outside, if you think of like the blue line as a kind of a cell membrane, information goes in and goes out, right? And that's just the way it's always been. So I stopped worrying about it after not too long.
Hmm.
Because, and really the way the people I was hanging out with, the kinds of jobs I was doing in those days, I was right down in it, you know.
Hmm. Somebody asks, where are you from? Where were you born?
I grew up in Schenectady.
Schenectady.
So I think of all those peripheral cities as, I mean, half the people I've known in the Adirondacks had roots in Schenectady, or they'd gone down there to work for a few years at General Electric or whatever. You know, the whole early Adirondack scholarship was based in Schenectady and Canton.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, William James Stillman, who led the Philosophers Camp, organized it, was from Schenectady. I mean, it's a long, long list. So Ballston Spa, Saratoga, Glens Falls, Schenectady, Utica, Herkimer, Syracuse, Watertown, Glen, you know, they're all part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel completely local, you know, even over here. Yeah, I look at, you know, blue line. I read the high peaks out my bedroom window, and I can get to the blue line in 20 minutes. And it isn't the same as living there. It definitely isn't the same as living in Saranac Lake. It's like the tropics down here by comparison. But the whole Champlain Hudson corridor and, you know, the greater ecosystem of the Adirondacks and the Green Mountains, it's a continuum. That's why I got Montreal in the book. That's been my city for 50 years,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and especially for the Northern Adirondacks, that's a lot of back and forth. And all our friends were from there when we were living down in Stony Creek, back and forth all the time.
So I have one more question that, and we're getting up towards 6 o'clock, so people feel free to go get your dinners or whatever. I don't mean to have you hang on too long here. But I wanted to ask you, Chris, you mentioned in an email, you feel it's important to develop a literary literature of the Adirondacks. Can
Yeah,
you
I've been
describe
thinking
that a
about
little
that.
bit more?
Terrible quote. It sounds so wrong.
No, I think it sounds
Well,
important.
you know, I mean, look, I mean, here I am, you know, on a Zoom meeting with a great writer of the Adirondacks and a brilliant filmmaker of the Adirondacks. And, you know, to talk that way is, there's more Adirondack writing going on now than there's ever been in my life. And I used to really look around for it. You know, I was like lost in what felt like a writing desert. You know, there was Joe Bruchac, Frederick Exley up in the Thousand Islands. I don't know. You know, and then I discovered Bill Kennedy and William Bronk, who both of whom kind of spoke with the right kind of music to me for how to write about this area. So do I think that fiction and literary essay of the Adirondacks needs a sort of a wider audience and few more practitioners who write about it specifically, but also in a general way? Yeah, I think that. But you know, I mean, it's still, we have the population of Albany, you know, year round. How do you do that? So basically, that's the question I've been trying to ask and answer all my life, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I look at other regions and other cities or whatever that generate their own particular literary movement or voice or sound or tradition, whether it's the South or New England or Concord or Dublin or Columbia, Yoknapatawpha County, you know. And I think about what those other writers did with those places and regions. You know, I don't think I'm the only one who has this idea ever, right, about the Adirondacks. So any way to encourage that, I think, is useful.
Well, it seems like a challenge is that people don't read as much as they used to.
I don't know if that's true either. You know, I mean, the bookstores tell me they're doing great.
I guess I'm thinking of the younger generation. I mean, as a mom.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's true. My son or my grandson is less inclined toward books, but he's changing. I think the pandemic has been good for readers.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
for reading.
So you spent years teaching at Middlebury. Did you work at all with younger students as well, like high school?
I started in high school in the 80s, even before I was at the magazine. I got hooked up with a guy whose name I forget, but he had NISCA money to send writers out into rural communities to do 3, 4, 5-day workshops in high schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in lower grades too. So, geez, for 2 years or more, I went around a lot and everywhere, Ticonderoga, Minerva, all up and down the Champlain shore and various different schools. A couple of places I went back more than once.
Mm.
So I did that there. That was the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then I taught in the prison in Raybrook when I was at the magazine for 2 or 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And that was great. And some of those guys, sold books. And one of them even got out and had a prison show on, I forget what network, Richard Stratton, look him up. And so I knew how to teach when I got to Middlebury. I'd also done a funny little adult workshop, and I don't know if you remember when Maurice Kenny had his weird little shop over the liquor store there on Main Street.
Yeah.
I had an adult workshop up there for 1 year. That was fun.
Huh.
So when I got over there and they looked at me and said, "Hey, we need some help," I said, "Okay."
Well,
I mean, it was a little more complicated than that, but that one helps to be a live body in town when everybody else is, sick or away.
it's a good strategy. Anybody else have any other questions or comments for Chris? I hope everybody's inspired to, if you haven't read the book, if you don't have it yet, please get it. There are copies in our local bookstore. You can get it online too. So if you
Shaw.net.
ChrisShaw.net. Okay. And we're going to carry some copies in our museum store. So if you want to stop by, you can pick one up from us, although you have to come during our open hours and we have to like hand it around the plexiglass, but we'll make it work. So I do encourage everyone to read the book. It's a gift, Chris. We're so glad that you.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy. This is so nice. I really appreciate it. Honest to God. And thank you everybody for coming. I hope if you get around to reading it, you'll like it and not be too shocked by all the, bad goings on and, these characters who I did know. I mean, so. Thank you so much. This is great. You guys, the whole organization is great. I just love everything you do.
Thanks, Chris. This has been really fun.
I agree.
Okay. Let's do it again, with or without the Zoom
audience.
Anytime. Okay.
Anytime.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Everybody cheer for the power line. Yay.
Power line. Yeah. Buy multiple copies for friends for Christmas.
That's right. Christmas.
You can get it at the book.
Okay. All right, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody.